There's a new contender in the streaming wars that might surprise you. Tubi, the free ad-supported app, has managed to compete with giants like Netflix and Disney+. Today on the podcast, we dig into why Tubi has become such a surprise hit. I'm Amil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Remember when streamers like Netflix and Amazon Prime hit the market and they made big promises about cutting the cable TV cord because they were cheaper? They were going to free you from being trapped by endless ads and just that feeling of clicking the clicker and having nothing to watch. And maybe it worked for a while, but the dream is dying. The price of streaming keeps going up and people are feeling frustrated. So there's a new player in the mix. Tubi is a streaming service. You can find, old movies and TV shows, a lot like Netflix, but it's free. Isn't that nice? Isn't that different? Yes, you have to watch a few ads, but so what? Seems to be working. In fact, Tubi has recently surpassed streamers like Disney Plus and Paramount Plus in viewership. So today on the podcast, we want to talk about what is up with Tubi. Why is it so popular? I'm joined by culture writers Kaiya, Shunyata, and Auntie Donahue. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
We're here.
We're talking about Tubi. It's very funny. It's on my smart TV, but I have yet to indulge in Tubi because it's always felt a little like I could get a virus by watching it. but Kaiya, you are a Tubi fan. What drew you to this platform?
I think the initial thing was it's free.
Mm-hmm.
And as somebody who has been a student for a very long time, money is always kind of a factor. And I think when I was buying subscriptions for Netflix or Amazon Prime, I realized I wasn't using it enough for it to kind of make it feel like, okay, I'm paying all this money for something, but I wasn't using it enough. And then now as a culture writer, I write about TV shows because I have to, so I don't necessarily have time. So it's nice to have something that's free to, I have to watch a couple of ads, but that's like watching cable. I did it for a lot of my life. So yeah, it's the free aspect that really got me into it. But then it widens up to, there's a really great selection on Tubi, older movies and older TV shows that you can't really find anymore. So it kind of works as almost like a lost media archive, which is something that I'm very interested in.
I mean, it's very, very hard now to get your hands on anything like pre-1990, it feels like. And I've heard that Tubi is a little bit like going to Blockbuster. Like you just kind of got to rent what's there on the shelves. Does that seem accurate?
Yes, it's very much, it feels like maybe if we had like a VR headset while we were doing it, it could really feel like Blockbuster. But it feels like just taking your time and looking at almost like, picking up a DVD and looking at the cover and being enticed just by that first image, instead of like a synopsis or because you heard about it. And it feels very much like you're choosing what you want to watch. It's not an algorithm choosing it for you. So I think that's what makes Tubi like the hot thing right now, is it feels like a Blockbuster.
So funny, but I love it. I actually love it. I miss Blockbuster too. And Tubi is, I've called it a new contender, but it actually is about 10 years old. What do you think is driving this current buzz? Like, why now?
I think, and I'm going to assume everybody has my experiences because of a universal fact.
Of course.
We have been inundated with like new TV, new prestige TV, new this, new that. And at first it was so exciting and these shows, there's nothing against the shows. It's just, I think we got so inundated that television almost started to feel like homework, where you have to catch it or you're out of the discourse or you won't understand this or you won't understand that. And then once you're a little bit behind, it catching up feels like a chore. I think we kind of pine for the days of when we were tweens and teens and younger, and you would just turn on television and zone out and go back to the days where it was almost embarrassing to watch TV, because it's like, it's a comfort thing now. Tubi feels very comfortable. Like, I am going to zone out in front of Hell's Kitchen season 6. Like, I owe no one anything. Nobody cares. It feels more like a sick day at home when you're missing school or summer vacation, as opposed to you're in the thick of exam periods, if that makes sense.
It does. Yes. A little too much, actually. And I want to just leave now and go watch Tubi for a while.
Let's go watch, guys. Let's just watch some Tubi. Let's watch a little Hell's Kitchen.
And it sounds like a lot of the comfort is coming from the fact that you recognize what's on the app. Like, there's a little bit of a nostalgia play here. Does that sound right, Anne?
Oh, well, first of all, nostalgia is my entire
nostalgia is your jam.
Point.
So
yeah, I love nostalgia. I love pretending it's 1996. Yeah, I mean, it's the same vibes as when you're Sundays when you'd watch TBS and you would just watch what was there. You'd watch Shawshank Redemption because it was on TV, or When Harry Met Sally because it was on TV, and it takes away the paralyzing nature of choice, where you have choices, but they're not your favorite choices, so you just choose something. It feels very like being spoon-fed like a tiny baby, and it's such a relief. I think I can't stress enough how little I have in my brain to care about huge critically acclaimed television at this point. Like, I care, but it's like work.
It's like
I don't want to work. I don't want to work.
Yeah,
no one wants to work. Nobody wants to work anymore.
Nobody wants to get up and work anymore by watching TV. Kaiya, it's interesting when we were talking about this, a couple days ago, 2 people said that their teen and tween loved this app. And that was kind of surprising to me. And, Tubi CEO Anjali Sood has said she's not competing with Netflix. She's competing with TikTok as far as getting those young eyeballs. What do you think about that, given that there's, old stuff on here that probably most of Gen Z has never encountered before?
Well, I find that interesting because a lot of I don't know about anybody else's experience, but my TikTok For You page is a lot of movie clips. Yes. And it goes on for like 1 to 2 minutes. Yep. And I get sucked into this thing. It's not even the beginning of the movie. It's the middle or the end. And I don't know what it is. And then I go onto the account and I'm scrolling and watching a movie on TikTok. And the thing is, these things have like millions of views. And oftentimes they're older or underrated films. And I think that kind of is the case here, where people are, like Anne said, like, it feels like watch this, where it's kind of like, let me take a step back and I want to watch something a bit older that I know nothing about. I don't have any expectations going in. So I think that's kind of why younger people might flock to Tubi.
Now, do you worry that, although it can be free now and it's ad supported, that to really compete, it is going to eventually have to adopt a subscription model, Anne?
I am not worried, because then I will abandon ship very quickly and go to Pluto or watch my clips on TikTok, just like I was saying. I think, there's always going to be that element that's free. Like when you had old school cable, you always had like 3 channels that you could access. So I think it's in Tubi's best interest to remain the way that it is, because you need that option. And also, like, who are we to start paying? Like, why does everybody have to have a 401k to be able to watch television these days? Yeah. Like, nobody has money. We're all poor and very sad and tired. And like, I don't have $20 a month to give to watch one show on Netflix. Like, Tubi is being very smart, and it seems like they're very reflective of the climate that we're in. And I don't see that climate, sadly, going away anytime soon. So Tubi is my best friend and my lover at this point in my life.
Kaiya, quickly, what do you think? Is the model that they have now something that can persist?
I think it can, of course, depending on if it's in the right hands. That is really what makes or breaks something like this. But I think they know who their audience is and who the people are that have gotten them to kind of surpass Paramount Plus and Disney Plus. It's people that use this because they need to use this. This is a way for like lower economic standing people to get entertainment. So I think they know this, and I think, at least I'm it's wishful thinking, but I think it'll stay like this.
Okay, well, we'll see. But, I guess all you have to do is just dump a bunch of old stuff if you really wanted to get eyeballs. Kaiya, Ann, thank you so much for chatting Tubi with me today.
Anytime.
Kaiya Shunyata is a freelance writer for Paste and RogerEbert.com. They joined us from Aurelia, Ontario. And Ann T. Donahue is a culture writer based in Cambridge, Ontario. I'm Amil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. We're going to take a turn into something very different now, something a lot of people may find uncomfortable or difficult, and that is death. It's pretty much the only guarantee in life. You're born and you die. So why don't we see more movies that cover this topic? Is there something that just makes us feel uncomfortable, that we want to turn away from it to avoid it? Well, a new movie called Tuesday gets deep into the nitty-gritty of death, what it feels like to watch someone that you love slowly die. It stars Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who actually wanted to be in the movie precisely because it tackles dying. She's definitely in new territory with this film. You may know her as Elaine Bennis or as the vice president in Veep. But here she is playing a mom whose teenage daughter has a terminal illness.
I'm going to die tonight.
Don't say stupid things like that, okay?
Mom, it's gonna be all right.
You need to say goodbye to your daughter.
As a mom, that is a hard clip to hear. It's a hard film to grapple with. And you heard a little bit of the parrot in that clip who plays death in the new A24 movie called Tuesday. Sophie Kohn is a writer and comedian. She had some pretty complicated feelings about the film because she herself has experienced caring for her mom while she was dying. When I spoke with Sophie a little earlier, I started out by asking her what she thought of the film.
I had sort of two wildly different and simultaneous reactions to this movie. It obviously transported me back into the caregiver role and all the terror and nausea and just relentless exhaustion that comes with it, and the moments of hope that get quickly extinguished, and just all of that just constantly pounding through your blood all day and all night. And that was a little hard. At the same time, a part of me was doing like a triumphant fist pump that this movie got made and got put out into the world, because we do need to start talking about death differently. And I think this is one of the ways that we move in that direction.
Mm. Well, why don't we tell people listening kind of what the movie is about? Because the premise is quite interesting. Can you just very briefly take us through, the story of this film?
Yeah. So there's a teenage girl called Tuesday, and she's dying of a disease that is not named. And her mom is having a really hard time just sitting with that truth, understandably. And the mom goes to all these lengths to avoid looking this fact in the face and grappling with it. And, she's relentlessly busy, and she spends long periods of time out of the house, and she's sort of toxically positive all the time. We heard in that clip, she was like, the daughter said, "I'm going to die tonight." And the mom's response was, "Don't be crazy, don't be stupid." And she's sort of centering herself in her daughter's experience. She can't really decenter herself and hold the truth of what her daughter is facing. It's really heartbreaking to watch. And then there's this giant talking parrot. Mm-hmm. Well, I guess all parrots are talking parrots. There's a giant parrot who represents death, and he kind of flocks to your side in your final moments to bring you the release of death. And the parrot and the daughter form this really meaningful relationship, I think, because they are the only ones who can actually name what is happening and not flinch and not look away.
Mm.
And the mom cannot cope with this. And so she tries to destroy the parrot. And without giving away the ending or spoiling too much, you cannot destroy the parrot. It's a hot new catchphrase.
I love that catchphrase, actually. You cannot destroy the parrot.
So her plan backfires massively.
Well, why don't we listen to what Julia Louis-Dreyfus has to say about this parrot? This is from her interview with Lulu Garcia-Navarro from the New York Times.
For me, he was my death doula. He was my guide. For me, my character. And we're all going to die. We all have that in common. And yet we do not waste any time really thinking about that. And I probably shouldn't use the word waste, but we don't think about it a lot.
I like this idea of a death doula because I think we usually associate doulas with bringing life into the world, not generally, leaving this world. And I notice in the movie, as you mentioned, her character, Julia Louis-Dreyfus' character, Zora, has a lot of trouble accepting what's happening to her. She'll do anything to avoid actually reckoning with it. She's selling all her stuff. She's avoiding spending time with her daughter while she's alive. And it felt like a very accurate portrayal of kind of how we all deal with death, avoiding it, avoiding talking about it. And certainly, as I mentioned off the top, how our culture deals with it, how we don't have more movies that sort of treat death in this way. What's your kind of reaction to that idea?
I think that's absolutely true. And I think there are a few reasons for that, maybe. We live in a capitalist and patriarchal machine that prioritizes returning to normal and business as usual at all costs. Mm. And there's very little in life that we will actually slow down for and make space for. And as a result of that, I think we don't really know how to make space for a grieving person or a dying person who's just not able to keep up with the relentless demands of, regular life. And so I think as a result, we have started treating death, like the death of someone's loved one, as a finite event that you can recover from and just bounce back the way things were. When in actuality, it is a massive seismic and permanent change in a person's soul. And you're not coming back from that. You're not going back to the way that you were. It's like I'm now walking around in a world where I can't see the color orange anymore, or I can no longer hear vowels. That's how fundamental and foundational the change is. And that change is forever. Mm-hmm. And we don't really like narratives that don't allow for the possibility of just getting back to normal, just keep going and just, remain unfazed in the face of massive trauma. And so we're very bad at talking about it. We're very bad at talking about things that don't have the possibility of a silver lining. Mm-hmm. We're very bad at talking about things where you just have to let it be what it is. It's searing pain, full stop, end of discussion. There's no yanking it back into a positive place.
Yeah. And I should say, actually, I'm saying we don't talk about this. We don't talk about death, but there are many cultures outside of sort of, the Western North American perspective that do have very interesting and meaningful ways of reckoning with death. It just so happens that most of our movies here in North America don't really deal with them. Let's talk a bit about Julia Louis-Dreyfus in this role, because it really is such a departure from anything we've seen her in before. Obviously, we know her as Elaine Bennis. We know her from Veep. This is a very serious role. How do you think she did?
I thought she was incredible. I loved her in this role, and I think I loved her in this role specifically because of Veep and Seinfeld. I think I could see these sort of two halves of her kind of dancing with each other and emboldening each other and tangled up together. I could see a very, very vulnerable character. And I could also see kind of a glimmer of absurdity in moments that she kind of brings to most of her roles. She has this comedic sensibility, of course. And I think that was so great for a few reasons. First of all, I think it makes the topic of death much more accessible for people. I think if you had an actor who's dripping in an intimidating level of gravitas, a Dame Judi Dench or anyone with a Dame in front of their name, I think that sort of adds to the feeling that this topic is just too big and too intimidating to to access. But I think having somebody who's a beloved comedic legend and, has that sort of vibe, I think creates an easier entry point for people to grapple with this topic if they might be feeling a bit nervous or unwilling to look at it. But the other thing that was really beautiful about the casting of Julia in particular was, I think there's this sort of perception that comedic art and quote unquote serious art are at two opposite ends of a spectrum and they have nothing to do with each other. I actually teach creative nonfiction writing and I also teach satire and humor writing. And I have learned in doing that they are actually much more tangled up with each other and tightly bound together than we might think. Like when we're laughing at a joke in Seinfeld, for example, what we're actually laughing at is the human emotion underneath that joke. We are laughing at the feeling and the feeling of connection and the feeling of recognition of our own emotional state. We're laughing because we're like, oh, I'm socially awkward like that too. Or like, I'm angry like that too. Or like, that's me. I get that. I feel that too. And then similarly, there is plenty that is absurd about looking after a dying person. I want to be really clear, not funny. It's not funny, but there's a lot that's absurd. Mostly the absurdity has to do with the fact that your society completely fails you when you're going through it, as we've just been discussing. Mm-hmm. But there are so many ways that the comedic and the more serious are just completely linked and tangled up. And I think having Julia in that role really embodied that in a way that was honest and beautiful. And I thought really effective.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you there for sure. She was very effective, and interesting to cast her, based on some of her past roles. Like you say, you were interested in seeing this film because of, what she brings to the role. How do you think this is going to land with a general audience who may come into it thinking, oh, this is another weird A24 movie, expecting something lighter and getting, basically a 2-hour treatise on death?
I mean, in a lot of ways, that sort of mimics how it works in the real world, right? Like you sort of go into supporting a caregiver thinking that it's going to be okay. It's going to be all wrapped up in a matter of weeks and they're going to be fine. And then you realize that it's actually a much more permanent wound than you ever could have imagined. I hope it shifts people's idea. We seem to have this idea that when somebody is grieving or dying, you have to fix it for them and you have to somehow corral it back into a sunshiny place. And I hope it sort of makes people realize it's not your job to fix it. You don't have to fix it. You can't fix it. It's not fixable. You just have to be in it with me. You have to just stare into the sun with me, even though it hurts and it sucks. It's just awful. End of story. And I also hope it makes people realize that grief is, as we've been talking about, grief is sort of for the rest of your life. So don't just show up for a grieving person once or twice and call it a day, but show up again and again and again. Call your friend on the 12th anniversary of their dad's death, because that date on their calendar is a minefield for the rest of time. It doesn't really stop hurting. I think the only thing that sort of changes throughout time is that people forget that you're dragging this huge boulder through your life, and it just gets lonelier, really. And so if you can be that one person who remembers and who keeps showing up and sends your friend a card on her 7th Mother's Day without her mom, that's such a rare and beautiful gift. And it's so appreciated. My mom died 10 years ago this summer, and it was her birthday a couple of weeks ago. And I haven't celebrated her birthday in a decade, but I had this one friend, Zoe, send me a text on her birthday. And she was like, it's June 4th. I'm just thinking about you, thinking about your mom. And it was that is love. That is understanding grief properly, the permanence of it. And I think that is who I aspire to be too.
I love that line about staring into the sun. You got me emotional. I'm going to start crying myself. Just two gals crying it out, talking about grief. Sophie, thank you so much for sharing your story, and thank you for contextualizing this film. I really appreciate your time today.
It was great to talk to you, Emil. Thanks for the conversation.
Such a lovely conversation. Sophie Kohn is a writer and comedian in Nelson, BC, and Tuesday is in theaters now. You can also hear Tom Power's interview with Julia Louis-Dreyfus over on the Q podcast. And that's it for the podcast today. Remember, you can listen to any episode of Commotion anytime. And hey, while you're at it, give us a follow. We're at Commotion CBC. I'm Amil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. Thanks for listening.